At 84, Debbie Reynolds finally revealed the painful truth behind one of Hollywood's most shocking betrayals. Long before Eddie Fisher left her for Elizabeth Taylor, another Hollywood legend reportedly warned Debbie not to marry him, calling the relationship ridiculous. She ignored the warning, and years later, her entire world collapsed in front of millions. How did Debbie lose her husband to her own best friend? What really happened behind the scenes of Hollywood's most infamous love triangle? And why did Debbie carry the heartbreak for decades before finally speaking openly about it? In today's video, we uncover the dark story that Hollywood tried to bury. Reynolds was in awe of Taylor when they first met as teenagers. Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher first crossed paths while entertaining American troops overseas during the Korean War, at a time when both young stars were rapidly rising in popularity. Reynolds was still early in her Hollywood journey, while Fisher had already become one of the biggest singing sensations in America. Charming, handsome, and blessed with a smooth tenor voice, Fisher was considered a teenage heartthrob throughout the early 1950s. His success was enormous for the era, with hit songs like Thinking of You, Oh My Papa, Lady of Spain, and Wish You Were Here dominating radio stations across the country. By the middle of the decade, he had placed 17 songs inside the top 10 charts, and had become one of the most successful recording artists of his generation. At the same time, Debbie Reynolds was building her own remarkable career in Hollywood. She first gained major attention in 2 Weeks with Love in 1950 before becoming an international star after Singin' in the Rain in 1952 alongside Gene Kelly. Her wholesome image, bright personality, and natural charm quickly made her one of MGM's most beloved young actresses. Long before Fisher entered her life, Reynolds had already formed a close friendship with Elizabeth Taylor. The two met as teenagers while working under contract at MGM Studios. Reynolds later recalled that Taylor was already a major star by the time they attended school together on the studio lot between film shoots. Speaking to People, Reynolds admitted she was completely mesmerized by Taylor's beauty and fame during those years. "I was just a beginner," she said, while Taylor was already one of Hollywood's brightest stars. Reynolds joked that anyone who claimed not to be impressed by Elizabeth Taylor was either lying or blind. Despite their very different personalities, the two young actresses bonded naturally, and their friendship only grew stronger over the years. By the time Debbie married Eddie Fisher in 1955, the three had become deeply connected both professionally and personally. The following year, Debbie and Eddie welcomed their daughter Carrie Fisher, who would later become a global star herself through Star Wars. Fisher rushed to Taylor's side when her husband died in a plane crash. During the early years of their marriage, Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher appeared to be living the ultimate Hollywood dream. The young couple was constantly photographed at glamorous parties, movie premieres, and private gatherings alongside some of the biggest names in entertainment. Among their closest friends were Elizabeth Taylor and legendary film producer Mike Todd, whose relationship became deeply intertwined with Debbie and Eddie's personal lives. The friendship between the two couples seemed genuine and inseparable. When Elizabeth Taylor married Mike Todd in 1957, Eddie Fisher served as Todd's best man, while Debbie Reynolds stood proudly beside Taylor as matron of honor. At the time, the four were often described as Hollywood royalty, beautiful, successful, wealthy, and endlessly admired by the public. Their bond became so personal that when Debbie gave birth to her second child in 1958, she and Eddie named their son Todd in tribute to Mike Todd and the friendship they all shared. But only weeks after baby Todd was born, everything changed in the most tragic way imaginable. Mike Todd was killed in March 1958 when his private plane crashed in New Mexico during a violent storm. Elizabeth Taylor was devastated by the sudden loss of the man she considered the love of her life. Wanting to support her grieving friend, Debbie encouraged Eddie to fly to Taylor's side and comfort her during the emotional aftermath. At first, nobody suspected anything unusual. Fisher was simply helping a close family friend through unimaginable grief. But as the weeks passed, his presence beside Taylor became increasingly constant. Then came the shocking betrayal that stunned Hollywood. Just 1 month after Mike Todd's death, Eddie Fisher separated from Debbie Reynolds and chose to stay with Elizabeth Taylor instead. Years later, Carrie Fisher would famously describe the scandal with dark humor during her one-woman show Wishful Drinking. According to Carrie, when Mike Todd died, her father rushed to Elizabeth's side, gradually moving to her front. The affair became an insane tabloid feeding frenzy. The affair between Eddie Fisher and Elizabeth Taylor did not simply end Debbie Reynolds' marriage. It exploded into what many still consider one of the biggest scandals in Hollywood history. According to Debbie's son, Todd Fisher, the public reaction was absolute chaos. In his 2018 memoir, My Girls, A Lifetime with Carrie and Debbie, Todd described the scandal as one of Hollywood's biggest, most notorious scandals, recalling how the media frenzy consumed their family almost overnight. Although Todd was still very young during the breakup, he remembered the atmosphere surrounding his mother vividly. Reporters followed every development obsessively, tabloids turned the love triangle into daily front-page news, and public opinion became brutally divided. Yet through all of it, Debbie Reynolds tried to keep functioning as a mother first. Todd recalled watching his mother continue raising 2 small children while still showing up to work every day, filming movies and maintaining the smiling public image America expected from her, even as her private life collapsed under worldwide scrutiny. The world was stunned, Todd later wrote. Eddie and Elizabeth were vilified. In the eyes of the public, Fisher became the selfish husband who abandoned his wife and children for another woman, while Taylor was branded a glamorous homewrecker who betrayed her closest friend. Debbie, meanwhile, became the symbol of the innocent victim, the loyal wife and heartbroken mother that audiences rallied around with overwhelming sympathy. Unlike Fisher and Taylor, who openly addressed the scandal in interviews, Debbie mostly stayed silent in public during the height of the controversy. Her quiet dignity only strengthened public support for her. Interest in the scandal grew even larger when, after resisting for nearly a year, Reynolds finally agreed to grant Eddie a quick divorce so he could marry Elizabeth Taylor in 1959. Years later, Debbie reflected on the betrayal with surprising calmness. In a 1983 interview with People, she insisted she never truly hated Elizabeth Taylor. "A man doesn't leave a woman for another woman unless he wants to go," she said. Reynolds even explained that she had personally encouraged Eddie to comfort Taylor after Mike Todd's death. Looking back, Debbie believed Taylor never genuinely loved Fisher, describing him as merely an interim interest during her mourning period. The scandal permanently changed the careers of everyone involved. Ironically, both Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor became even bigger box office attractions because of the public fascination surrounding the affair. Studios capitalized on the drama, and both women commanded larger salaries and even greater fame afterward. Eddie Fisher, however, suffered severe professional damage. America largely turned against him. His television variety show was canceled in 1959, major contracts disappeared, and his once massive career quickly declined into nightclub and lounge performances. Todd Fisher later admitted the backlash destroyed his father's image almost instantly. "There was outrage," he explained to Yahoo Entertainment. "My dad had contracts canceled for morality clauses. It literally ruined his career." Even after Elizabeth Taylor and Eddie Fisher divorced in 1964, following Taylor's affair with Richard Burton during the filming of Cleopatra, the emotional damage between Debbie and Elizabeth lingered for years. By then, Debbie had already remarried millionaire businessman Harry Carl in 1960, hoping to rebuild her life. But that marriage eventually collapsed as well after Carl's gambling addiction, and failed investments left Reynolds facing serious financial problems by the time they divorced in 1973. Reynolds and Taylor eventually reconciled. Debbie Reynolds never truly repaired her relationship with Eddie Fisher after the affair. The betrayal had cut too deeply, and despite years passing, the emotional damage between them never fully disappeared. But surprisingly, the same could not be said for Elizabeth Taylor. After years of distance and lingering tension, the two former friends eventually found their way back to one another in one of Hollywood's most unexpected reconciliations. The turning point reportedly came in 1966 aboard the famous transatlantic cruise ship Queen Elizabeth. By pure coincidence, Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor found themselves traveling together once again, this time with their new husbands. Reynolds was married to businessman Harry Carl, while Taylor had famously moved on from Eddie Fisher and married Richard Burton after their explosive affair during the filming of Cleopatra. At first, the situation could have been unbearably awkward. Instead, something unexpected happened. According to Todd Fisher, the old wounds slowly softened during the voyage, and before long the couples were dining together publicly on board the ship, creating another media sensation that tabloids eagerly devoured. Over time, the friendship between Debbie and Elizabeth gradually became genuine again. In many ways, the two women seemed to understand each other better after surviving years of public humiliation, heartbreak, and scandal. By the early 2000s, their bond had grown surprisingly close. Following the September 11th terrorist attacks in 2001, both women became stranded in New York City. Taylor reportedly invited Reynolds to stay at her uptown hotel for safety and comfort during the frightening aftermath of the attacks. That same year, the two actresses reunited professionally in the television comedy These Old Broads, written by Debbie's daughter, Carrie Fisher. The film almost playfully mirrored their real-life history, with Reynolds and Taylor portraying former rivals still arguing over an old romantic relationship involving a man named Freddie. But behind the comedy was lingering emotional truth. According to Todd Fisher's memoir, My Girls, Elizabeth Taylor privately apologized to Debbie before filming one of the scenes. "I'm sorry for what I did to you with Eddie," Taylor reportedly told her. Todd later admitted the apology surprised his mother because Elizabeth still seemed deeply emotional and guilty about the affair decades later. Debbie herself eventually reached a place of acceptance about the entire scandal. Although Eddie Fisher remained bitter for years and even portrayed Reynolds negatively in his 1981 autobiography, Debbie refused to publicly attack him. She admitted she never even read the book because she did not want to reopen old wounds. Fisher had described their marriage as already doomed before Elizabeth Taylor entered the picture and painted Debbie as controlling and cold with money. Reynolds strongly disagreed with his version of events, but chose not to escalate the conflict. "I have no venom about Eddie," she once said. "I'm trying not to dislike him. He's the father of my children." Meanwhile, Fisher's career and personal life continued declining over the decades. After divorcing Taylor in 1964, he remarried 3 more times as his once enormous fame slowly faded. He eventually died in 2010 from complications related to hip surgery. Debbie and Elizabeth, however, remained unexpectedly close until the end of Taylor's life. According to Todd Fisher, their friendship became stronger and more sincere in later years than many people realized publicly. When Elizabeth Taylor died in 2011, she even left Debbie a collection of valuable sapphire jewelry, including earrings, a bracelet, and a necklace, a final symbol of forgiveness and reconciliation between two women once torn apart by one of Hollywood's greatest scandals. Debbie Reynolds herself died in December 2016, just 1 day after the death of her daughter, Carrie Fisher. Looking back on the infamous love triangle that had once humiliated her before the world, Debbie eventually came to a surprisingly peaceful conclusion. You have to look at what life is all about, she once reflected. And is he worth it? In the end, she believed her restored friendship with Elizabeth Taylor was perhaps worth more. Debbie Reynolds was warned she shouldn't get married to a singer. As excited as Debbie Reynolds was to marry Eddie Fisher, not everyone around her believed the relationship would end well. In fact, one of the biggest stars in the world tried to stop her before she ever walked down the aisle. Years later, Reynolds revealed that Frank Sinatra personally warned her not to marry Fisher, and his reason was brutally honest. The two had worked together on the 1955 musical The Tender Trap, where Sinatra had already built a reputation as both a legendary performer and a notorious womanizer. According to Reynolds, sometime before her September 27, 1955 wedding, Sinatra pulled her aside and bluntly told her she was making a mistake. In a 2015 interview with People, Reynolds recalled him saying, "Oh, don't marry Eddie." She remembered Sinatra warning her that singers were rarely faithful husbands. "We're not faithful," he told her. "It's ridiculous for you to take this on." But at the time, Debbie thought Sinatra's warning sounded completely absurd. She was young, deeply in love, and convinced Eddie Fisher was different. Reynolds later admitted that she simply brushed Sinatra's concerns aside. "I said, 'Why? I don't think that I will listen to you. I really think he's adorable,'" she recalled. Even Debbie's mother had fallen for Fisher's charm and believed he was the perfect match for her daughter. Looking back decades later, Sinatra's warning suddenly felt far less cynical and far more prophetic.